It is July 18th, 2005 in Los Angeles, and the fax machines at a handful of entertainment trade publications are spitting out a press release that will rewrite the economics of the internet. News Corporation, the media empire built by Rupert Murdoch, has agreed to acquire a company called Intermix Media for $580 million. Buried inside Intermix, worth almost nothing on its own balance sheet 2 years earlier, is a 2-year-old social networking site built in a Santa Monica office park by a team that had been making pop-up ads and ringtone subscriptions. That site is called MySpace. Within 18 months, it will be the single most visited website in the United States, ahead of Google. Within 5 years, it will be sold for a fraction of what Murdoch paid, to a company most Americans have never heard of, for $35 million. This is the story of the fastest rise and the fastest collapse in the history of American social media. And it starts not with a visionary founder in a garage, but with a group of marketers trying to sell ringtones to teenagers. The company that built MySpace did not start as a technology company. It started as a company called Intermix Media, formerly known as eUniverse, run out of Los Angeles by a young entrepreneur named Brad Greenspan. Intermix's business through the late 1990s and into the early 2000s was a portfolio of low-budget internet properties, online dating sites, screensaver downloads, sweepstakes pages, and email marketing lists. The company grew through acquisition and volume, buying small web properties and cross-promoting them to each other. It was not glamorous. It was closer to a direct mail operation that happened to run on browsers instead of envelopes. And by 2002, some of it had drawn the attention of regulators. Intermix subsidiaries were later accused of distributing adware bundled inside free downloads, a practice that would eventually cost the company $7.9 million in a settlement with the New York Attorney General. That was the environment MySpace was born inside of. Not a research lab, not a garage, but a marketing company that understood, better than almost anyone in Los Angeles at the time, how to get millions of people to click on something. In late 2002, an employee at eUniverse named Tom Anderson, who had studied film and critical theory at UCLA and Berkeley before drifting into internet marketing, began experimenting with a new kind of product. A competitor called Friendster had launched earlier that year in San Francisco, built around the idea that people would create a profile page and connect it to their real friends. Friendster grew fast, then buckled under its own success. The site's servers could not keep pace with demand. Page load times stretched past 20 seconds. And Friendster's leadership, wary of the same adware and marketing reputation that clung to companies like Intermix, rejected an acquisition offer from Google and slowed its own feature development while trying to police the site's culture. Anderson, along with a colleague named Chris DeWolf, watched Friendster's frustrated users looking for somewhere else to go and pitched Intermix's management on building a competitor. Greenspan approved it. A small team, reportedly no more than a dozen people, built the first version of MySpace in about 10 days, repurposing code and infrastructure the company already had from its other web properties. It launched in August 2003. What set MySpace apart from Friendster from the very first week was not a technical innovation. It was a policy decision. And honest history holds that this decision is probably the single most consequential one in the company's history. Where Friendster restricted how much users could customize their profile pages and actively deleted accounts it suspected were fake, MySpace let users edit the raw HTML and CSS behind their own profile. Teenagers who had never written a line of code discovered they could paste in snippets scavenged from tutorial sites to change their background, add music, add glitter graphics, add an auto-playing song by a band nobody else had heard of yet. The profile page became a canvas, not a form. And where Friendster required a real name and discouraged multiple accounts, MySpace allowed anyone to sign up as anything. A band, a comedian, a brand, a fictional persona. Every new user was automatically given one default friend, an employee named Tom Anderson, whose smiling profile photo became the first thing tens of millions of people saw when they joined the internet's most popular website. Tom became, by some measure, the most friended human being in the history of the internet, a status he never fully monetized and later described with visible bemusement. The other decision that separated MySpace from every competitor was its relationship with music. Chris DeWolf and the product team noticed that independent bands, unable to get traction on Friendster or on traditional band websites, had begun using MySpace profiles as de facto homepages, uploading songs that would autoplay when a visitor landed on the page. Rather than restrict this, as Friendster likely would have, MySpace leaned into it, building dedicated band profile pages and treating musicians as a distinct, valuable class of user. Artists like the Arctic Monkeys, Lily Allen, and a then unknown Louisiana rapper named Lil Wayne built real audiences on the platform before traditional labels caught up to what was happening. A band called Block Party, an artist named Owl City, an act called Colby Kylat, each traced meaningful parts of their early fan base directly to MySpace discovery. By 2006, MySpace hosted more than 3 million band profiles, and for a period of about 4 years, MySpace was, functionally, the largest music discovery platform on Earth, years before Spotify or even iTunes occupied that role in the cultural imagination. Growth compounded fast. MySpace crossed 1 million users by the end of 2003. By mid-2004, it had passed 5 million. By early 2005, it had crossed 20 million registered accounts, and the site was adding roughly 200,000 new users a day. Advertisers noticed before Wall Street did. Intermix's stock, which had traded for pennies in the aftermath of its adware settlement, began climbing as investors realized what was buried inside the company's portfolio of low-rent web properties. Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation had spent much of 2004 and early 2005 searching for a foothold in the internet, having watched the growth of Yahoo and Google from the outside, while its core businesses in newspapers and television faced long-term structural decline. Murdoch's advisors identified MySpace as the fastest-growing property in the space, and in July 2005, News Corporation acquired Intermix Media in its entirety for $580 million, a price that stunned much of the media industry, given that MySpace was barely 2 years old and had never turned a meaningful profit on its own. Murdoch would later say the deal was the best acquisition of his career, at least for a while. Brad Greenspan, the Intermix founder who had greenlit MySpace's creation, but had by then been pushed out of leadership amid boardroom disputes, publicly criticized the sale price as far too low, arguing the company was worth billions more. He would spend years afterward, largely unsuccessfully, trying to make that case in public and in court. The News Corp acquisition did not slow MySpace down. If anything, it accelerated everything. By April 2006, MySpace had passed 60 million users. That summer, it overtook Google as the most visited website in the United States. According to Hitwise data, a milestone that seemed almost unthinkable for a site that had not existed 3 years earlier. Traffic reached roughly 80% of all social networking visits in the United States at its peak. In August 2006, Google, eager to secure the search advertising rights to the internet's biggest traffic engine, signed a deal with News Corporation guaranteeing MySpace's parent company at least $900 million over 3 years in exchange for Google powering search and search advertising across the site. It was, at the time, one of the largest online advertising agreements ever signed, and it briefly made MySpace look less like a media curiosity and more like the profit engine Murdoch had promised his shareholders it would become. By early 2007, MySpace had more than 100 million accounts worldwide and was valued by some analysts at as much as $12 billion, a figure that, if realized in a sale, would have made it one of the most successful internet acquisitions in history relative to its original purchase price. MySpace was covered on the evening news. Politicians opened campaign profiles on it. A contestant named Tila Tequila leveraged her MySpace popularity into an early and strange kind of internet-native celebrity, becoming, according to some counts, the most friended user on the platform after Tom himself, and later hosting an MTV dating show built entirely around her online fame. MySpace had become, for a period of roughly 3 years, something no website had ever quite been before. The default social identity layer for an entire generation of American teenagers and young adults. And the site was famous in print media and on television in a way that felt permanent. It was not permanent, and the seeds of the collapse were visible, in retrospect, at almost the exact moment the site reached its peak. A relatively small and unglamorous website called Facebook, launched from a Harvard dorm room in February 2004, had opened to the general public in September 2006, having spent its first 2.5 years restricted to college and then high school email addresses. Facebook's founder, Mark Zuckerberg, and his team had made design decisions that were, in almost every respect, the opposite of MySpace's. Where MySpace let users customize their profile with free-form HTML, resulting in pages that were often visually chaotic, slow to load, and occasionally unreadable, Facebook enforced a uniform, minimalist template that every profile shared. Where MySpace treated real identity as optional, Facebook required it, initially even requiring a verified university email address to join at all. You can read that contrast 2 ways, and Honest History holds both readings at once. One reading says MySpace's chaos was the point, a genuine expression of teenage identity and creativity that Facebook's rigid uniformity could never replicate, and that the freedom of the profile page was precisely what had made the site culturally significant in the first place. The other reading says the same customization that made MySpace feel alive also made it slow, visually exhausting, and increasingly cluttered with intrusive advertising, while Facebook's clean, fast, consistent interface felt like a relief, especially as users aged out of wanting glitter graphics and auto-playing music on their profile. Both were true, and the market eventually decided which one mattered more. Facebook introduced its newsfeed in September 2006, a single scrolling stream that surfaced what your friends were doing without requiring you to visit each of their profiles individually. It was initially deeply unpopular, prompting protest groups with hundreds of thousands of members demanding its removal. But the feed fundamentally changed what a social network could be, turning it from a collection of static personal homepages into a constantly updating stream of activity, and MySpace would not build an equivalent feature until years later, long after the pattern had become the industry standard. Facebook opened its platform to third-party developers in 2007, allowing outside companies to build applications, including games like Farmville, directly inside the Facebook experience, deepening engagement in a way MySpace's more closed architecture struggled to match. And Facebook, crucially, did not carry MySpace's reputational baggage. Because MySpace had allowed near-anonymous signups and had grown explosively among teenagers, It became the subject of a wave of press coverage in 2005 and 2006 focused on online predators and underage safety, coverage that culminated in several state attorneys' general investigations and, eventually, mandated age verification and safety features that MySpace had to build reactively rather than by design. Facebook, having grown up inside universities under real names, never carried the same cultural association with danger, even as its own privacy practices would later draw scrutiny of a different kind. Inside News Corporation, meanwhile, the operational picture was deteriorating in ways that had little to do with Facebook at all. Murdoch had installed a series of executives to run MySpace's parent unit, Fox Interactive Media, and the corporate mandate, consistent with the rest of News Corp's businesses, increasingly emphasized advertising revenue over user experience. Pages grew heavier with banner ads, pop-ups, and promoted content. The Google search deal, while lucrative, had set aggressive traffic guarantees that some former employees later said created internal pressure to prioritize page views and ad inventory over product quality, a dynamic that pushed MySpace further in the direction that was already costing it users. Engineering leadership changed repeatedly. The site's technical infrastructure, built rapidly in 2003 on top of code recycled from Intermix's earlier ad-driven properties, had never been fully modernized, and by several former engineers' later accounts, simple feature updates that would take competitors days took MySpace's team months, bogged down by a codebase that had been extended rather than rebuilt. Chris DeWolf stepped down as chief executive in April 2009, replaced by Owen Van Natta, a former Facebook executive brought in specifically to try to reverse the momentum, a hire that in hindsight reads as an admission of exactly which company had already won. By late 2008, Facebook had overtaken MySpace in worldwide unique visitors. By 2009, the gap had become a chasm, and it kept widening every quarter. MySpace's user base, once the largest social network on the planet, began an uninterrupted decline. News Corp, having paid $580 million for the company and having once entertained internal valuations north of $10 billion, wrote the value of the business down repeatedly. In June 2011, News Corporation sold MySpace to the advertising network Specific Media in partnership with the musician Justin Timberlake, who took a minority ownership stake and a role helping relaunch the site with a heavier emphasis on music. The sale price was $35 million, roughly 6% of what Murdoch had paid 6 years earlier, and a figure that made the entire arc from $580 million purchase to billion-dollar valuations to a $35 million fire sale, one of the most dramatic value destructions in the history of American internet media. Specific Media and Timberlake relaunched MySpace in 2013 as a music and content-focused platform, explicitly abandoning the attempt to compete as a general social network and instead trying to reclaim the site's old identity as a destination for musicians and fans. The relaunch drew some attention and modest praise for its design, but it never came close to reclaiming cultural relevance. In 2016, the company that owned MySpace by then, Viant Technology, was acquired by Time Inc., folding MySpace into a media conglomerate as a minor, largely dormant asset rather than a flagship product. That same year, in a footnote that became its own small controversy, MySpace disclosed that a server migration years earlier had permanently destroyed a substantial portion of the media uploaded to the site between 2003 and 2015, including, by MySpace's own estimate, some 50 million songs uploaded by 12 years of independent artists. Musicians who had used MySpace as their first public archive discovered their early recordings, sometimes their only surviving copies, were simply gone. It was a strange and quietly devastating coda for a platform whose single most significant cultural contribution had been giving unsigned musicians a place to be heard. Tom Anderson, the default friend of 100 million accounts, had left the company years earlier in 2009, following the executive changes that pushed out DeWolf and largely stepped away from public life, later becoming known instead for a second act as a widely admired amateur travel photographer, his name occasionally trending on social media whenever people rediscovered, with some astonishment, that he was still alive and had simply moved on. What survives of MySpace today survives mostly as a cultural reference point rather than as a living product. The site itself still technically exists in a diminished form, run under the ownership of a subsidiary of the same media holding company, largely stripped of the traffic and relevance it once commanded. The pattern MySpace pioneered, the personal profile page as the unit of online identity, the friends list, the public comment wall, the status update, did not disappear when MySpace declined. It migrated almost entirely into the products of the company that beat it. Every customizable social profile, every platform built around a public friends graph, every site that treats music discovery and fan community as core features rather than afterthoughts, owes something to what a dozen marketers in a Santa Monica office park built in 10 days in 2003, working from code meant to sell ringtones. MySpace did not fail because nobody wanted what it offered. It failed because the company that eventually offered the same idea with a cleaner interface, a stricter identity model, and a faster-moving engineering culture simply executed the idea better at exactly the moment MySpace's corporate owner was distracted by advertising quotas and executive turnover. Honest history holds that MySpace was not merely lucky at the start and unlucky at the end. It built something genuinely new, proved a market existed for it at a scale nobody had previously imagined, and then lost that market to a competitor who studied its mistakes in real time and built the opposite site on purpose. If you had a MySpace page, if you spent an afternoon in high school editing your profile's HTML to get the background just right, if you remember the first time you unfriended someone and immediately regretted it, or if Tom was still your only friend the day you finally deleted your account, drop a comment below. Tell us your top 8, the year, and whether you can still remember your password. The people who built their first online identity on that site know more about what MySpace actually meant than any acquisition price ever will. Subscribe, because this archive is still being built, and we have the story of another American tech empire coming next.